A single fight or a knockout can have devastating effects on a fighter. All it can take sometimes is one bad knockout to affect a fighter physically or mentally, so that they're never the same after the fight. So today we're going to go through some cases where fighters were never the same after one fight. One fighter that should come to mind already is Cody Garbrandt. Cody Garbrandt may be the closest thing MMA has to a one-hit wonder. For those who remember, Cody Garbrandt was a highly rated prospect in the bantamweight division, undefeated coming into the UFC, and put on some good performances on his way to the title, which ultimately led to his title fight versus Dominic Cruz. Cruz being the greatest bantamweight of all time at that point, he would knock down Cruz 3 times inside a round, on his way to a clear unanimous decision. The way Garbrandt dethroned the best bantamweight in the world shocked a lot of people, and people had high hopes for Garbrandt in the future. His first title defence would be announced versus former champion TJ Dillashaw. Dillashaw was the second best bantamweight behind Cruz at that point, a very skilled striker, and he was the former champion for a reason. But he did lose his title to Dominic Cruz in a close decision loss. So Cody was the rightful favourite going into the fight and had all the momentum. The first round for the most part was very competitive. Cody and TJ went back and forth until the end of round 1, where Cody found himself against the cage and planted a perfect left hook on the chin of Dillashaw and sent him down. Luckily for TJ, that happened at the very end of the round, so the round ended and TJ had his minute to recover, where his coaches gave him some good advice for the next round. Because not long into round 2, TJ clips Garbrandt on the chin with a right hook, which almost puts him out. TJ follows him to the ground, lands more punches, and the ref is forced to step in. But what made the loss so sour for Garbrandt is the personal beef between the two. These two had personal history before this fight, so for Garbrandt to lose his title, take the first loss of his entire career, and also to be screamed at by Dillashaw after losing, must have had a massive effect on Garbrandt mentally. The following year they were booked for an immediate rematch, but this time the fight ended even clearer, as Dillashaw kicked Garbrandt in the head in the first round, which ended the fight and also Garbrandt's title aspirations. Garbrandt's next fight would be a massive step down the rankings versus Pedro Munoz, a fight where Garbrandt was expected to bounce back and have a comeback. But as soon as Garbrandt got hit, his game plan went out of the window as he was desperate for a finish, and Garbrandt got himself knocked out again in the first round. Garbrandt made the smart choice to take a lot of time off after that fight, and he was back in action a year and a half later versus the veteran Rafael Assunção, where he got his first win since 2017, where he knocks out Assunção in the second round. Garbrandt seemed on his way to a comeback, as he took on rising contender Rob Font in a 5-round main event. But instead Garbrandt got pieced up for 5 straight rounds, losing a very dominant decision. This had Garbrandt thinking he needed to make a change, so he decided to change weight class and move down to flyweight, where he took on Kai Kara-France in December. The flyweight move would be a bad decision, as Cody's already questionable chin was even worse, as he'd be put down 3 times in the first round and put out eventually. He would then take another year and a half off. He returned to bantamweight and took a major step down in the rankings against Trevin Jones, who was unranked and on a 3-fight losing streak. Despite the low quality of opposition, Garbrandt would win the fight very unimpressively, as he seemed afraid to commit to anything. In fact, he threw 33 punches in the space of 3 rounds, which is equivalent to 2 strikes per minute, which I think says it all about where Garbrandt is in his career. And that takes us to case number 2, Conor McGregor.
I am going to truly love putting a bad beating on this little glass jaw rat.
I'm come here for smash this guy. I don't want to talk.
Mate. Smash me! Smash me!
I can smash
you say send location. Here it is, right here in front of you.
I think it's gonna be long night for him.
Right.
It's gonna be long night.
Yes.
For him. He knows this.
Lord, save me. That's
he knows
tasty.
this. He's like when you go to the he moved to box and he tap there. You know, like you you tap 3-4 times. You tap 4 times.
So what? I'll tap your head off the
like
canvas,
chicken.
kid.
Do you have a round in mind?
As long as it takes. I believe 1. He's a glass jaw. I know he is afraid of a smack. And if you're afraid of a smack off me, a smack will feel like a double-barrel shotgun.
This is maybe the most iconic case of a fighter never being the same after one fight. I think some people forget how big of a deal McGregor was back in 2018. He was considered at one point to be one of the best fighters in the world, if not the best fighter in the world. After winning a second world title in the space of a year, he fought Floyd Mayweather in one of the biggest pay-per-views in history. But there were concerns that McGregor, after making it that far in the sport, would start to lose focus with the amount of money he was making. His return fight to the UFC would be Khabib, the undefeated Russian, who had taken Conor's world title, as he stepped away from the UFC to fight Mayweather. Needless to say, Khabib is one of the most dominant forces MMA has ever seen. Plus how heated the rivalry was between the two before the fight, Conor had a massive amount of pressure to win the fight, especially in the way he was talking before the fight. So when the fight actually came, it wasn't long before Khabib had McGregor down in the first round, which followed an extended beatdown. Somehow McGregor survived the beating in round 2. Khabib took his foot off the gas in round 3, which allowed Conor to have some success, but that was all erased in round 4.
Good entry by Nurmagomedov McGregor, and he gets tripped right down.
He worked on his condition.
There's the choke.
He's got it. It's under the neck.
There it is. There's the tap.
Look at him. Look at him screaming at the corner. Look at him. Oh,
And
no,
now Khabib jumps the fence.
No.
Whoa! No! And he's going right at Dylan Dennis. Mayhem! Oh, no!
So after all the build-up and everything he said before the fight, Conor would get beaten up by Khabib, who then proceeded to drop-kick his jiu-jitsu coach. And the image before and after the fight says it all. He would come back a year and a half later to face Donald Cowboy Cerrone, but the fight seemed a bit one-sided considering how old Cerrone was at that point. And that's what it ended up being, as McGregor head-kicked Cerrone in the first round in the first 30 seconds and followed up to win the fight in 1 minute. His fight after that would be a lot harder, as he was given a rematch versus Dustin Poirier. Conor looks good early on, wins the first round, but he kept taking low kicks, and the calf kicks continued to add up until McGregor completely slows down and Dustin Poirier knocks him out at the end of round 2, being the first knockout loss of his career. He was then given the chance at an immediate rematch, where Conor looks good for about 1 minute before he starts getting hit and taken down. He gets back up at the end of round 1, but after getting up he snaps his ankle and the fight's over in the first round. And that marks the last moment of Conor's fighting career. That fight took place in July 2021. It's been almost 4 years since then, and no sign of Conor returning to the octagon. That injury seemed to remove any sort of motivation Conor had to return to fighting. Since then we've seen Conor drink heavily, take drugs, assault random people, and basically embarrass himself compared to how he used to be.
Ilya Abturo, top Toro. I grab him by the scruff of the chest and slap that little nose off him, yeah? Little ding-dong of a thing he is, yeah? I'm fucking Spanish. I'm in Marbella, bro, yeah? I'm in Marbella at the bare knuckle stall and let's see what's what. We'll bounce in the yoke, have a bare knuckle. You little fool, I'll cave your head in. See what happens here when you cross me, bro. You come across...
I'm blessed to have entered into the movie alongside him. He was patient with me. He gave me guidance, and I just took it. You know, we had a good rapport on set. He has 75 movies made. I have 75 bar fights made. And that's it. We had a good...
It's weird to imagine where Conor was 10 years ago compared to now. Which takes us to maybe the most depressing case on the list, Tony Ferguson.
This is a rat race, but I'm no rat. I'm a fucking turtle. Ninja turtle. So which one's your favorite? I like Michelangelo.
For about 10 years, Tony Ferguson has been one of the UFC's fan favourites. From his crazy fighting style, his crazy personality, his crazy training techniques, Tony Ferguson was a staple in MMA for about 10 years. And it can be easy to forget how much of a force he was back in his prime. Tony Ferguson at one point was the most feared UFC fighter on the roster. This picture shows the faces of his opponents during the fight, and this was something he did consistently to every opponent. However, before he started losing, there were signs already of him slowing down, as a series of knee injuries was starting to affect his performances in the octagon. He was set to fight for the title for the first time in his career against Khabib in 2020. But because of a certain virus, the fight was cancelled and became the fight versus Justin Gaethje. Tony made the fight harder than it should have been. He cut weight 20 days before the fight for no reason at all, which would have massively impacted his health going into the fight. That combined with his injuries and getting older, there is a reason the fight played out the way it did. The fight more or less was an extended beatdown from start to finish. Tony did quite well for himself early on in the fight, even dropping Gaethje at the end of round 2 with an uppercut, but Tony's loss of speed became more apparent. Tony's chin definitely held up throughout the fight, but he was really struggling to get any offense of his own, as Gaethje capitalised on Tony's lack of speed and his lack of defence. Throughout his career, Tony's defence has always been lacking, but he normally makes up for it with his speed and how overwhelming he is. But Tony, with his reduced speed and his reduced mobility, he was no longer fighting the same way he used to, which led to Tony being hit on the chin over and over and over again, with Gaethje punching him as hard as he could. And the beating became progressively worse throughout the fight, being so bad in the 5th round that the ref had to start thinking about stopping the fight. It's weird to imagine that Ferguson was actually the favourite going into this fight. He was riding an 11-fight win streak before this fight, and was expected to be too much for Gaethje. But Gaethje would put on one of the hardest to watch beatdowns in the entire sport. The final punch of the fight was a jab in round 5, which was the last punch Tony's brain could take, as the ref had to step in and Gaethje became the new interim champion, and ending Ferguson's long win streak in the most heartbreaking way possible. Tony Ferguson took the beating of a lifetime versus Gaethje, and no fighter should be the same after that sort of fight. He then fought 5 months later against rising contender Charles Oliveira, who almost snapped Ferguson's arm off on his way to a dominant decision win, winning every single round. He was then given the chance at a comeback versus Beneil Dariush, a much easier fight than Gaethje and Oliveira, where a similar thing happened. Dariush ripped his ankle in round 2 on his way to another decision win, where Ferguson hadn't won a round. Tony then decided to take an even harder fight against UFC newcomer Michael Chandler. Which put Tony on the receiving end of one of the worst knockouts in UFC history. He was then given a softer opponent in Nate Diaz. The two would look very old in that fight, and Diaz would submit him with a guillotine in round 4. He then took on an unranked opponent, Bobby Green, who would outbox Ferguson for 3 rounds, before choking him out cold at the end of the fight. He was then given another step down the rankings in Paddy Pimblett, and it should have been over if he loses this one. Paddy drops Tony in the 1st round, and once again Tony gets sat on for the rest of the fight, on his way to a decision loss. He took the last fight of his career versus Michael Chiesa about 4 months ago, who would submit Ferguson in the 1st round with a rear naked choke. And as of now, Tony has been cut from the UFC, making Tony the owner of the longest losing streak in UFC history. And that's going to do it for the video. Like and subscribe, leave a comment. Goodbye.